My name is Adrian Nantchev, and this channel is all about helping you become a remarkable entrepreneur. So that's why I started this podcast, Become Remarkable, to bring you people from all over the world, whether entrepreneurs or not, to share with you their experience, their journey, who they are, their story, but most importantly, why they're doing what they're doing. Today I have with me Alex Mott, all the way down south in Portsmouth. So please, Alex, please tell the world, who are you, what's your story, and why are you doing what you're currently doing?
Okay, well, a few years ago, I was working quite happily as a part-time music teacher in schools. I had about 60 or 70 students on the books every week. I used to sell drum kits, sticks, practice pads, music books, and that was generally the way things were going. I played a number of bands at the same time and saw that to be the direction that probably the rest of my life would take. Then something very strange happened in 2010. This was confirmed by something else that happened in 2015. And I've been on this track, this path, ever since.
So I'm very curious. What can you say about the time as a new teacher then? What was it all about?
Teaching?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it was a natural progression. Well, I say it was a natural progression. I was actually at university at the time studying engineering. Mm-hmm. And I had a phone call from my old woodwork teacher who said that you're the only drummer I know. We have a vacancy at the school that I used to be a student at for a drum kit tutor, 2 hours on a Wednesday afternoon. Would you like to start doing that? Being a student, the hourly rate was equivalent to working, let's see, 3 or 4 nights behind a bar somewhere, the kind of thing that my other friends were doing at university. I'd played drums a lot by that time. So obviously I jumped at the chance to do this. After I graduated with a master's degree in engineering, we had a reunion. All my friends were in bed around about 10:30, 11 o'clock, because they were all working 60 and 70 hours for people like Asda. And I decided then that's really not what I wanted to do. So I put a few leaflets, mail shots around the schools in the area, and this eventually built up to having enough students to have a full-time income, as mentioned, with the other bits and pieces, with gigs and with trade sales as well. But the engineering part of it has never really gone away. That's what I'm doing now. I actually haven't played any musical instruments for, 3 years now. Put it down because I really wanted to concentrate on this thing that came up in my life through quite mysterious circumstances. Have you had a chance to read the Black Mud story?
No, I haven't. No, I've seen 3 documentaries though.
Okay, right. Well, each one is a Black Mud gig.
Mm-hmm.
You may have noticed in the titles.
Right.
Crash Arts Productions, a Black Mud gig, and then it's Rethinking Egypt, Rethinking Bosnian Pyramids.
Yeah, I was about to ask, what happened in 2010? Clearly this is something to do with all these documentaries.
Yeah. Well, I'd read a couple of Chris Dunn's books about ancient engineering and the theories that these sites around the world, Egypt, Peru, India, for example, must have used some kind of ancient machinery and an ancient power source in order to do this work, because it's igneous rock in many cases, and we can't cut this stuff today without diamond or corundum or some other form of hard-tipped tool. It's just something we can't imagine the ancients would have had. So the question is, how did they do it? I was having some problems with my internet connection at the time, and I phoned the technical support line and explained the problem, and they said to me, right, we know what that is. We'll send you some step-by-step instructions on how to get that fixed. Which email address would you like us to use? And I'd only ever had one email address at the time, so I was confused. So naturally I asked, well, what is this other email address on my account? And it was called Black Mud, BLACKMUD. So naturally I asked, well, how long has it been there and who put it there? And the chap that I spoke to didn't know the answer to either of those questions. So I wrote to the head office of the ISP at the time. You've obviously got some kind of security problem here. Someone's got into my account. They put this Black Mud email address there. I would like to know who's done this and how long it's been there and details of whatever traffic has been going to and from this email address. And they wrote back and said, we don't know anything about this, but we can confirm that no traffic has been going to or from this email address. It's just there on your account. Would you like us to remove it? And so on. So short of hiring a private detective to find out more about this thing that was intriguing but really didn't seem to be doing anything as such, I had some fun online with my new internet identity, Black Mud. My friends had some fun with it as well. But otherwise, I basically forgot about it. And then in 2015, I went to Egypt. And this was my first time to Egypt, researching what Chris Dunn has mentioned in his book, for example. I chose the Kemet School of Ancient Mysticism, and Kemet is K-H-E-M-I-T. And the Kemet School briefly have their doubts as to whether it was really the Egyptians who built the pyramids and some other areas of recorded history. There's a slightly more broader view about things. They think that the construction of these artifacts was the responsibility of a much more ancient and advanced, in some ways, civilization called the Cometians, because Kemet is the original name for Egypt. So how this all ties up, we found ourselves in a clothing shop in Luxor because the Kemet School had asked us, would you like a souvenir? And we all said, great. It'll be a T-shirt. It will have Kemet School of Ancient Mysticism, our company logo, written across the back of the shoulders. And on the front, a cartouche. Here, cartouche, Egyptian enclosure with hieroglyphs written in it. You can have whatever you like. It can be your name, your nickname, your girlfriend's name, whatever it is. Tell the chap behind the counter, and he'll translate it into hieroglyphs and put it in your cartouche. So when it came to my turn, and he said to me, what would you like in your cartouche? I said, Black Mud. And he looked at me and shook his head and said, what, Kemet? And I said, beg your pardon. And he said, Black Mud means Kemet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the strangest synchronistic thing that's happened in my life. But at the time, it really did confirm that that's what I should be doing now. I should no longer be a musician. This is what I should be doing now. Call it archaeology, call it research, investigation, whatever it is. This is apparently what I'm supposed to be doing now. And like I say, I've been on this path ever since. Black Mud has come back a couple of times now. And that's where I am today. I've been to Egypt twice. I lived there for 3 months this year. Lebanon, Peru, Bosnia, Bolivia, looking at all of these ancient stoneworking artifacts and trying to work out how they were done.
Yes. I'm not sure this is Chris Dunn's theory, but I remember hearing some theory that one of the ways that the pyramids were built were through flotation devices, where they had the bricks, each individual one, had like, I forgot what they're called, the flotation device you have on your armbands, those.
Yeah,
like
I've seen that. Yes, I've seen that. And he floated them.
Yeah, all the way at the top,
yes,
yeah.
Yes, I've seen that theory. I mean, credit to the guy for workshopping it. It is the same one that we're talking about. He's actually done a test of this, not just a computer animation. He's actually built a rig and tested this, and it does work, I believe. Mm-hmm. Just some doubts on the watertight nature of the pyramid. There's another theory involving the flotation of blocks. It's how you keep everything watertight. That's where I have my doubts with those particular theories. But who knows? He may well be right with that.
Yeah, and the Library of Alexandria. I remember hearing some speculation that because it was burnt, although it's thousands of years ago, there could have been a section in there, just like today, Dewey Decimal System, just in the corner over there, that had the construction methods or techniques of how they were built, and they were just simply lost in the fire.
It is possible, however, if you look into the burning of the Library of Alexandria, it's not actually known exactly when it was burnt. It's not known exactly by who, and the physical location of the library itself is not actually known either. That's it's interesting that you mentioned there's a period of history I've been looking to recently with Alexander the Great, who has no grave, no mausoleum, no monument. So I will be looking into that in a little bit more detail, but suffice to say for the moment, I've got a few questions about that period in history. There are a lot of claims. Basically, there are a lot of claims and not very much physical evidence to back any of this up. And if you've been watching the Rethinking documentaries, it's physical evidence. That's what I go after. First of all, physical evidence.
All right. So as a quick side note then, are you speculating that Alexander the Great was fictitious?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
I've not heard that. I agree with you. A benefit of the doubt, or no, not either way. But that's interesting. I mean, that's interesting.
He was 25 and he conquered 80-90% of the world. I mean, does that sound reasonable?
Well, I think it was a lot of. I think insofar as it was just loads of placebo effect. Like when he goes into Egypt, becomes what is it? Amon-Ra, Kaman-Ra. It's just like more confirmation that he's God, son of Zeus, and it's like, oh, I can do these incredible things, and it's just loads and loads of winning streaks just based on successes and successes and successes. But then if we really want to go deep, then in the book of Daniel, it talks about how this was supposed to be prophesized as well. You know, the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, and each one each empire is successfully bigger. So either that Daniel prophecy was written beforehand in prediction, foresight, or it was done in hindsight, where it's like we needed someone here to explain this, or this beast from the ocean, all the rest. Alexander fits, things like that. But you know, that's a whole different kind of worms there.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the story of Alexander the Great, and it's well worth looking at Oliver Stone's film, Alexander, because it does focus on some quite strange aspects of it. If you compare Gladiator or 300, where it's fighting all the way through, and Russell Crowe in Gladiator is in every scene from the beginning to the end, and in 300 again, Leonidas is in every scene from the beginning to the end. If you look at Oliver Stone's Alexander himself is seen on his feet on the battlefield, swinging a sword around for a few minutes in a 3-hour film. He's on horseback for the rest of it. You see him riding into battle. You see him riding out of battle covered in blood, actually fighting very, 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 very little time. There's no explanation in Oliver Stone's film as to the boot camp period of his life, like Leonidas in 300, where he's taken away from his family at a very young age and taught how to be a Spartan. There's none of that in Oliver Stone's film either. I strongly recommend having a look at Oliver Stone's film, Alexander. It's 3 hours, it's a bit of a chunk, but it does look at things from some quite interesting angles. The statues in the film are very interesting.
Yeah, funnily enough, I was watching it actually 24 hours ago. And
right.
I've been listening to the soundtrack a lot recently. It's nice music just in the background. And before that, I was watching, I think it was like a 2.5-hour documentary about Alexandria's life. That was, I don't know, on the Discovery Channel or something like that, 10 years ago or something like that. So yeah, it's interesting stuff. But do you not think that the fact that he wasn't fighting is not just like a movie constraint? Like in Lord of the Rings, he cut some parts out from the book. It's just screenplay, it's just screenwriting.
I thought, well, he's he is portrayed in the film as, I mean, Colin Farrell had the advantage of age on his side for the role, but because he could play a very young looking Alexander and a kind of 30, well, a more mature Alexander with a bit of stubble and stuff. So I think he had the advantage on his side. But otherwise, there's plenty of romance in it, shall we say. There's plenty of that. Alexander is not portrayed in Oliver Stone's film as a great military tactician, a leader of men, a warrior, any of those things. Really. And sorry, if you're familiar with Oliver Stone and other directors, they get a chance to do things in certain films. Sorry, while we're on the subject, there's Ozymandias. Ozymandias. This is another Hollywood staple mentioned in Watchmen and also in Alien Covenant recently. Ozymandias. Alexander the Great was 3rd century BC. Ozymandias was 12th century BC. And they have some kind of relationship, but all I could track it down to was that they were both grafters. They both managed to achieve a great deal in quite a short time. Apparently, that's about the only connection I can see between Ozymandias and Alexander the Great.
Oh, I've never heard of Ozymandias, but also when you say like achieve a lot in a short space of time, do you know what about that phrase where it's the candle that burns the brightest burns half as long? And you've heard surely the 27 Club, where all the famous musicians die, or some of them die at age 27. And I think the most famous recent one was Amy Winehouse in 2011.
Oh, really?
I mean, like maybe that's just correlation, causation, the age and all this, and maybe it's too much of a stretch. But
yeah,
it's, you achieve a lot of stuff in a short space of time. Maybe just exhaust yourself, or what you push and motivate and drive. I don't know, the heart gives out or whatever. Or
well, I used to be a musician. We do not have healthy lifestyles.
Right.
I used to be a musician, so I used to be a student as well. Yeah, and I used to say this to my students: if musicians did not have their personal habits, they'd probably live forever, because the activity of music, a musical instrument, is just so very, very good for you, for your mind and for your body. But yeah, there's the creative, destructive, everything else that goes along with it as well, unfortunately.
But bringing it back to the pyramids, though, do you not think it's like the God of the Gaps fallacy to say it was the aliens, insofar as we don't know who did this? It must have been something supernatural, or thousands of years ago. We don't know what's causing lightning bolts. But it must be Odin, must be Zeus.
Oh right, I see. Yeah. Unfortunately, there are two camps on this at the moment. There's the Egyptologists, and there's the ancient alien enthusiasts, stroke the ancient machinery enthusiasts as well. They were saying that this was all done with advanced technology and covered up by a conspiracy. The research that I was looking at between April and June this year doesn't suggest either of those things as being the actual explanation for how all of this stuff was done. There are two things, if you look at the Rethinking Egypt documentaries, there are two things, aside from the pyramids, that really need to be explained. That's the Serapeum boxes, because these boxes are very, very well made, and they have these quite accurate internal corners, which cannot be done with a copper chisel, because this is igneous rock. This is either a diorite or a grandiorite or porphyritic diorite or cyanite. This is tough stuff, 6 and above on the Mohs scale. So that's question one, the manufacture of the boxes. Then we have the test pits at the Aswan quarry. So you have these trenches where they dug the obelisks out of the ground, but inside the trenches you have these test pits. And one of them is only a few feet wide, and I think about 7 or 8 feet deep, with a flat base, which can't be done with a round ball, unless the worker was hanging upside down by his ankles with no means to remove the dust that was produced between each blow, and he'd still have to go down there afterwards and flatten the bottom of the hole. So we see things out there still, we just don't understand.
Yeah, I also remember that you talked about on the surface, or on each plane of, say, the cube, there was this little square of like extruded rock that you thought was like residue from the manufacturing or the chiseling out of the rocks. And you thought, you were speculating maybe they were for lifting, but it doesn't quite all add up because they're not in the same location. And then similarly, you also speculated that I think some of the sarcophagus lids, there was some indentations that didn't quite make sense.
Drip marks.
Mm-hmm.
There are the drip marks on the underside of the Serapeum boxes. The trouble is, with all of this stuff, my geologist, Susan Moore, very experienced career geologist, sedimentologist, works for the oil and gas industry, made it very clear to us in Bolivia, you can't date stone. It's just as simple as that. You can't date stone. In order to do radiocarbon dating, it needs to be something organic needs. And the tolerances of radiocarbon dating are about 10,000 years, I think, kind of reliably, plus or minus 400 years. Anything past that and the tolerance goes up and the reliability becomes less and less. So when we're talking about those Serapeum boxes, it is quite possible that they were a series of blank boxes, well made. Then somebody came in, moved the lids and removed whatever was found inside them. Then somebody else came along and did the polish job on top with the lids out of position. Because otherwise the drip marks you would expect to find on the body of the box as well, and they're only on the underside of the lids, and that could only be done if the lid was dislodged. The timescales involved here are absolutely huge. It's just simply not known what was the Menkura pyramid. Again, that is just so puzzling. It actually looks as if someone was trying to protect and rebuild the casing stones on the Menkura pyramid from the bottom up. It may have been that the original ones were taken and then somebody else tried to repair it and tried to restore it. If you have a look at Rethinking Egypt Update, it goes into more detail on this. But it's a very, very puzzling business. And then trying to put some kind of chronological order on what's happened out there is, again, very, very difficult to do, because all of this stuff could be tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years old. We just don't know.
Right, but to the layman out there, what does all this mean? Why is it all important? You know, maybe it was some would say maybe it was aliens, ancient aliens, Egyptologists saying, well, because it was the pharaohs and the afterlife was involved, they had to be very ingenious and they had to be ingenuity. And maybe it was that, or that spectrum. But then also you see a lot of creativity and all this smart ingenuity, like Peru. And in India, I remember down south of India, I think it was down south or up north, I can't remember, there's this temple that's like older than the pyramids, and like they don't quite know how the top of the temple, like a big boulder or something, got up there. It's like it weighs who knows how many metric tons or whatever, and that kind of rock isn't found in the local area. But so I've seen this before and heard about this, but so what? Arguably, this was thousands of years ago. So if it was aliens, where are they today? If it's the afterlife, well, that kind of goes into theology and religion. So,
yeah,
what does it all mean?
Well, what it's pointing towards is a theory that will explain not only what's found in Egypt, but also what's found in the other sites that share the same equator. So, for example, if you can do this on Google Earth, if you trace a line from Easter Island through Ollantaytambo, Nazca in Peru, through the Giza Plateau, I think Petra and a couple of other sites of interest, you'll eventually end up at Angkor Wat. Now, all of these sites are actually located on the same equator. You can draw a line between them. So many important sites that feature these megaliths as well, big stone structures, and we can't work out how they're done, actually form their own equator around the planet. This is off by 23.5 degrees from where we are now. This suggests that there may have been a time in the past when the planet was spinning upright, like a basketball on your finger. The magnetic pole and the North Pole were in the same place. And under those circumstances, humans, us, we would have been different. You may have heard of the Magi, three wise men that came to visit the baby Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Well, magi is M-A-G, which is magic, which is magnetism. And this is something, again, that's come up in the research. The research started off at the same place as everyone else, with ancient aliens, ancient machinery, and the whole thing's been covered up by an evil government conspiracy. It then changed direction by itself. What I'm on to now is seeds, fertility, magnetism, those kind of things. And this is far, far more interesting. Anyone who still wants to chase ancient aliens, ancient machinery, by all means, carry on doing that. There are plenty of people you can subscribe to if that's what you're interested in. But what we're looking at the moment is a much, much larger theory. We were magi.
Beg pardon?
We were magi. In the past, in this alternative age, we may have been like we are now, but not exactly like we are now. It's obviously difficult to explain scientifically.
I was going to say, when you talked about how on the same equator, I was thinking then, and you answered it actually, I was thinking, again, so what? They're rocks, but there's boulders and all sorts of igneous and metamorphic and all that kind of stuff. Then you mentioned it with regards to magnetism. So are you alluding to that rocks are magnetic of sorts? Because there must have been, interesting, please explain.
Paramagnetic and diamagnetic. So one thing I would really like to do is clear up one of the major misconceptions about the kind of rock that you find in Egypt for a start. So you find diorite, grandiorite, porphyritic diorite, those kind of stones, basalt as well. The pink stone with the black flecks that is often called rose granite, pink quartzite, those kind of names. This comes from Siam, and Siam was the original name for Aswan. And this particular type of rock, which is seen all over Egypt, is actually a very low quartz granite, because most people think that when you visit Egypt, you're surrounded by high quartz granite. It's not quite as simple as that. Syenite belongs to a subset of granites, and its only feature, really, that distinguishes it from conventional granite is the low quartz content. However, this does make it a very highly paramagnetic stone, according to the research of, I've just forgotten his name, I beg your pardon, it will come to me. Philip Callahan, I think. Round Towers in Ireland. So, but this is just where we're getting started, really, on the accurate identification of rocks, because it seems that these things were very, very important in the past, and it may have been a situation where you had, for example, pyramids generating particular types of electromagnetic fields, or perhaps some kind of very low frequency that improved agricultural yields in combination with putting the right arrangement of para and diamagnetic rocks nearby. And it's all agriculture, that's what we're looking into. Now, seeds, there is a theory that we're looking at now that those boxes in the Serapeum were actually seed vaults. And this is because one civilization knew that their civilization would end with a catastrophe, and knew that the survivors on the other side of this catastrophe would need something to start growing food with. So they filled these huge boxes in the Serapeum with seeds. This is why the internal faces are very flat and polished to inhibit bacterial growth, the same way as you would change crack tiles in a kitchen. That's the theory we're looking at now. It's all about survival of the species after one of these catastrophic events.
Yeah, interesting. So with regards to the magnetism of the rock, then as soon as they're magnetic, paramagnetic and diamagnetic?
Yes, diamagnetic, yeah.
And that's suddenly going to affect the magnetic field of the Earth and the compasses.
If you look at Brian Forster, produces a number of videos from Bolivia at Pumapunku, and you have the H blocks there. And I was actually there. You can see a little bit of this on Rethinking Peru. we did the same experiment where the rock does have an effect on the compass, and the geometry of the rock itself seems to have an effect on the compass. This is only something we're really beginning to start looking into now, the importance of magnetism. What we think is that our ancestors had a much more intuitive grasp of magnetism compared to our almost absence of knowledge on this subject. Eric Laithwaite, it's well worth looking up his videos on YouTube, which are now brown and pink and faded because they're so very, very old. But he presents all of the puzzles that we still have with magnets. How if you do this, it produces a counterintuitive result. How if you do this, and it produces another counterintuitive result. We just don't understand magnetism. We know what it does. We don't really understand what it is as such, but we think our ancestors, the ancients, they knew how to utilize magnetic fields.
Yeah, and interesting. You also mentioned it just earlier with regards to, you said back then we were different from what we are now today, but at the same time similar.
Yeah.
In a way. I've heard something very similar to this once, where it's like back then we had knowledge or ability or capacity, whether intuitively locked inside us on a genetic level, or just skill or talent, we were harder or tough-skinned. But I do remember something about how some furnaces, I don't know, ancient Babylon or something, so ancient furnaces, they could get temperatures from melting iron, all that kind of stuff. They could get temperatures that today aren't really possible or feasible, and yet they could do it, I don't know, on the whim almost. So it's like, I've heard that, extrapolating, I've heard this idea before, we were smarter but different back then, but the same.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier also, all this ties into a larger theory. Could you elaborate on that, please, at all?
So, and the person you really need to speak to about this is Patricia Aoyan. And I'll see if I can set you up, because she's the person, she's the authority on this theory that she's been working on 60 years. She invited me over to Cairo this year to document her research. I couldn't sleep with these kind of concepts running around my mind, the size and the scale of the kind of thing she was talking. It's everything basically that she's talking about. It affects absolutely everything. As I understand it, have you heard of the Golden Age?
Golden Age? No.
Golden Age. Okay, it's an age of peace, benevolence. Everything's bountiful, fruitful, plenty. There's no war. It's a wonderful time to live. This may not actually be a myth. So what I do know about it is that the Golden Age is based on the sun. And the sun is Horus, the Egyptian god. And the age of the moon, the Silver Age. Silver is denoted Ag. That's its chemical description. So from the sun and Horus in the Golden Age, we derive horticulture. And from the moon and silver, we derive agriculture. So we have two great ages, the Golden Age and the Silver Age. This is backed up by what you can find in museums and what's very often found on the walls of the temples, particularly the Temple of Hathor at Dendra, which has this entire alternative history of life on planet Earth laid out across the ceiling. And one particular area that I found on there is mentioned in Rethinking Egypt Update, which was the black square. There's an area of the ceiling that intentionally hasn't been restored. And my question is, why not? Because the whole of the rest of the ceiling has been restored, apart from the central panel, which is halfway. But there's one area of the ceiling that hasn't been restored, and I'm working on describing that a bit more fully with Patricia at the moment.
So how does all this tie in with today?
Well, the stonework. As we cycle from one golden age to the silver age, there is a period between where there's a pause, and this is known as gnosis. And at that point, it may be that our physical laws are temporarily turned off, if you like. And that's when the stonework was done. It was whoever did the stonework exploited this gap. And at this particular point, the pause, the gnosis point, it may have been that the stone was naturally less dense. It was lighter, so you could move it around, you could carve it, you could do this. And this theory is not perfect. There are a few problems with this theory that I'm looking into now. But otherwise, on a global level, it's a theory that explains most of what you see, as I say, not just at Egypt, but at all of these other sites that you see on the same magnetic equator, the old iron line, as we call it, the ancient equator. And if you want a little bit more detail, I can go into this if you like, because this is all stuff you can look up on Google Earth. So,
yeah, please do.
If you look at the Giza Plateau and you look at the Sphinx, for example, this ancient equator, if you trace it, again, Google Earth, you can do this on Google Earth, you trace this ancient equator through the Giza Plateau, and it's in alignment with the Sphinx. It's difficult to tell with the resolution of Google Earth, but from what I've seen, this line goes the difficult way. It starts at the base of the Sphinx, the rear end, right up through the back, the spine, and then between the paws. And if it's not doing that between the paws, it's parallel, and it's out by only about 30 feet. The Sphinx is in alignment, L-I-O-N, alignment with this ancient equator. Words and the importance of words come into this research very much as well. The Sphinx looks how it is today because the head has been cut down numerous times. Again, if you appreciate the timescales involved, whoever created the Sphinx first may have been subject to a catastrophe. Civilization 2 comes in, recuts the Sphinx to make it look more like their god. They have a catastrophe. Civilization 3 comes in and recuts the face of the Sphinx down again to make it look more like their god. My sources say that the Sphinx was originally a cat. And from there we derived catastrophe and cataclysm. So it's a memento, it's a memorial, if you like. It's in alignment with this ancient equator. The cat cuts the sine wave, in other words, as Patricia and I would say, the cat cuts the sine wave and we go from gold to silver or silver to gold.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I remember hearing also that humans have been around for like 300,000 years or plus, you know, way beyond, well, the Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens, all that kind of stuff. So 300,000 years, we have what, 10,000 years of recorded history, 15,000 years?
Yep, and we have a lot of evidence of a catastrophic event 12,000 years.
Yeah, and I do remember also hearing that Mediterranean area.
Yeah,
2,000 or 2,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago, it's quite volcanic and quite a lot of earthquakes, and that may have inspired also the story of Atlantis, somewhere, I think near Crete.
Yeah, but I mean, there are about 200 sunken cities in the Mediterranean. If you go to Byblos in Lebanon, you can visit a museum where fish fossils have been found at 3,000 feet above sea level. We found seashells in the desert at Tuna El Gabal. So obviously something very, very serious has happened in that region of the world in the past. Elephantine Island is just smashed to bits. It's just completely wrecked, absolutely smashed to bits. Something did that, you know.
Elephantine Island?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I also remember some speculation that you mentioned Moses and Moses' points. Moses, when he parted the Red Sea.
Gnosis I mentioned.
Oh, Gnosis.
Gnosis, N-O-S-I-S. On Moses, that may be Atmos, and that may be atmosphere.
Interesting. But I remember some speculation that the parting of the Red Sea was actually a coincidence of some volcanic activity or some earthquake activity happening elsewhere, And we see this with volcanoes where the tide comes out, tide goes out to sea, and then it goes right back in.
Yeah.
With the tsunami, and with the Pharaoh's army. But also, I'm just very curious, because the Sphinx is in line with the Giza Plateau, how does that affect the whole flat Earth argument?
Well, as far as I'm aware, there is no flat Earth argument. But there may be a reason why it's come up. Now, I've seen these photographs of very long bridges across very large expanses of water. And you can see the legs go up and the legs come down. You can see that because of curvature. Also, if you were to walk 10,000 miles, 10,000 kilometers in a straight line, make a sharp 90-degree left turn, walk another 10,000 kilometers in a straight line, make another sharp 90-degree turn, walk another 10,000 kilometers. If we're living on a sphere, you should find yourself back where you started. So it is quite easy to prove spherical Earth if somebody has the landmass beneath them to do the walking. But there may be another reason why this has come up now. The Golden Age may not be two-dimensional as such, but it may mean losing a dimension, some kind of obstacle that we have at the moment. Rather than relying on agriculture, which is what we need to live in the Golden Age, it may have been possible to derive all of your energy from the sun. Masses may have been different. For example, again, it may have been possible to mold stone with your hand or pick it up again, because the same physical laws that we use today were not exactly the same as they were in the past. This is obviously a difficult theory to grasp for most people, because they see granite is hard today and it has always been hard, and as far as they know, it always will be. But if you consider being an ant, for example, and you've hatched next to a building site, and every day of your ant life, you've been crawling across a slab of concrete in the ground to go in to the grass and get things and bring them back to the nest. You've been doing this your entire life, crawling across this piece of concrete every day. Then one of your friends says, I've been doing some research. This used to be a fluid. And you can imagine how difficult it would be for that ant who's done his research to try and convince all of the others that this thing that is solid beneath them, and as far as they're concerned, has always been solid, was in fact once a fluid. We know that as humans, because we have the broader perspective on things. But do you see what I mean on that particular? Probably be very difficult to convince people that maybe rock hasn't always been in exactly the state that it is today, and that's how and when this work was done that we find so incomprehensible today. That's how they did it.
Beyond their context?
Well, just naturally and softer and more malleable, lighter. As I say, it's not a perfect theory. I have a few problems with it myself, but it does explain a great deal, even though it will probably never be possible to prove it scientifically. I have a master's degree in engineering. This is not a nuts and bolts cause and effect situation. It's just not that kind of thing.
But as we slowly wrap up, I remember there was some talk a few years, I don't know how many years ago, certainly within our lifetime, that some strange device had been discovered in the Mediterranean Sea. It's like a safe almost, or part of a safe door. It was a circle. It was an ancient computer, apparently.
Antikythera mechanism.
Yes. You're just talking about how they're able to. At one point, they could have powered with the sun, losing a dimension. And I thought, what about that old computer or a speculated computer? What does all that mean? You think?
I don't know. That's not something I've actually looked into it in a great deal. I'm afraid, so I couldn't really comment I couldn't really comment on that. I can say, with regards to the losing the dimension kind of thing, that ancient equator that I mentioned earlier, well, it's, if you're on planet Earth and you're walking this ancient equator, it's a straight line in front of you and a straight line behind you. If you go up to the top of the planet and look down, it's a ring. But if you get this ancient equator and represent it on a two-dimensional map of planet Earth, it becomes a sine wave. And the sine wave is represented by the snake. And the snake appears in numerous cultures. You will see many, many appearances of the snake in wall reliefs, ceiling reliefs, paintings. And the theory is that the ancient equator is the sine wave. Like I mentioned earlier, the cat cuts the sine wave. From sine, I could go on with this, from sine we have sin, sinus. So it's an interesting property of many of these statues that you can see, that the noses have been broken off. When the ears, the crowns, the other extremities, other very fragile looking stuff has not been damaged, only the noses have been damaged. And this could be, again, to do with the same thing. It could be sine and sinus.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah. Potentially. Yeah. Interesting. But quickly then, what does all that mean? What does that mean?
Well,
the sinus today, and
well, it means that we're looking at a version of history that is backed up with physical, scientific, symbolic, and esoteric evidence. There's a lot of evidence that supports this theory about the Golden Age and the Silver Age. And it's obviously a very, very different interpretation of human history than the one you'll read about and the one that you're taught at school. It's very, very different to that.
Before we wrap up, I remember this theory going around talking about how from the Dark Ages, 500 AD, till like 1200 AD or 1200 AD till like 1600 or something, didn't exist, didn't happen. So we're technically living in the 18th century. This is like
I've heard that theory. Yeah, I've heard that theory too. I don't know. The Dark Ages, that sounds like a catastrophe. There are vitrified forts in Scotland, interestingly enough. There are forts in Scotland that have been melted. And the chap who's doing the research up there, I think he calls himself Sarcastic Twit on YouTube. He's on site doing these video documentaries, and he's saying that these forts weren't just melted, they were melted from the tops down. And that's obviously a very, very interesting observation to make. The heat source could have only come from above, if what he's saying is true. The heat source would have had to have come from above, which means that it could have been an ancient nuclear weapon, solar plasma event, meteoroid burst, something like that, that produced an enormous amount of heat and burned all of these forts simultaneously. The other theory that they were burnt to increase their structural integrity, or I think some of the other theories that academia are offering, simply ignore the amount of fuel that you would need to melt forts. And this was recreated in 1980, I think, by Arthur C. Clarke. They sent a team up there, built themselves a section of the wall, set it on fire, and then ran out of fuel. They had to contact the local scrap yards and anyone else who could keep on bringing the fuel up to the top of this hill to keep the fire going. And I think one of the researchers on that said that there aren't enough trees in Scotland to melt all of these forts, and there is no evidence that it makes them stronger. It makes the stones brittle. So something may have happened in the past, a very serious event. If that did happen, that would have also affected the agriculture. The land would have been laid to waste either side of this scorch mark in Scotland, for example, that basically cut the country in half, our own country. No one knows about this, by the way. This is very, very, very few people know about the vitrified forts in Scotland. But that would have led to an exodus. There would have been no food. So the Dark Ages, yeah, that's it is interesting exactly what could have caused the Dark Ages.
And not necessarily the Catholic Church.
Not necessarily. Maybe again some kind of external event. I think they talk about snakes in the sky, actually.
Interesting, because what this reminded me of then was remember the sun cycles for the past 2,000 odd years, hotter and colder. So the Roman times it was hotter, then Victorian times or industrial age it was a bit colder. So it fluctuated. And when you talk about the vitrified force, I've never heard of before, I was thinking, well, maybe sun flare. People in the States every now and then bang on about EMPs, or some other electromagnetic problems or other things from the sun. Well, and it's from the top, and not enough trees, so that must mean there's loads more energy than what is locally available. I'm thinking the sun then, and this I remember that the Maunder Meander, I think, something like that from the 1600. Beg pardon?
Maunder Minimum.
That's the one, yeah. And there's a few others, Maunder Maximum, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I was thinking that maybe that's the vitrified force. Yeah, idea.
It's possible, and we're in the window for this now because, of course, our magnetosphere is weakening. So if you were at a time in the past with a similarly weakening magnetosphere, it would be that much easier for something from above to come through. So that's may have been what happened. May have been what happened in the past. We don't know. We're living in a period of great stability at the moment, but the evidence I've seen from around the world would suggest that planet Earth is the Wild West. In comparison, there are plenty of these catastrophic events. Plenty of these catastrophic events throughout history. We're just living in a particularly stable time right now.
Interesting. A lot of people will say this is a particularly unstable time these days.
But I mean, in terms of the sun and natural environmental, we obviously have our own problems, yeah, sure. But in terms of environmentally induced catastrophes, for example, we've been in a period of great stability for some time now. Up until, as I say, recently, more volcanoes. This is related to solar minimum, grand solar minimum that we're heading into now. That's accompanied with more volcanoes, more earthquakes, and a decrease in agriculture. And there's going to be a wine shortage next year, I think, in Europe, because the crops didn't make it. Shrinkflation is another one people need to look at. Shrinkflation, go and buy a Toblerone bar now and compare what you get to what you did. This is apparently not just profiteering. It's because the cost of the raw materials is going up, and it will continue to go up in this cycle of things where we are now. Not a pretty picture.
Yeah, I also hear that a few years ago there was a shortage in Russia for wheat, and lately there's soap, I think it was, or fat. There's another shortage, not necessarily of wine. Not heard this, but there's another shortage happening. But I certainly remember wheat a few years ago in Russia.
Yeah.
Or in mainland Europe, the continent. But yeah, I heard these things.
It's absolutely fundamental. It's you've probably heard of the conspiracy theories. That was it. Mayor Rothschild said, "Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws. Control the food and the seeds and the agriculture if you really want to control." And that's what this is all about. We can't make seeds. You know, you've heard of names like Monsanto. They can modify seeds. I think BASF made their own potato, but we can't make seeds. That literally is magic for us, seeds.
I can remember my science teacher more than 10 years ago giving us a challenge, like briefly before we leave the school, or some moment, said she will give us like a month of her wage, or a year, probably a month, if anyone can find a food source that does not originate from the sun. And I've always pondered about that. Always, it's like, interesting, because photosynthesis, plants, and then the humans, all the rest, the food cycle, the food chain, and all that. It's like, she's right about that. Always got me thinking.
There is one is probably a bit unpalatable. There is one example that I can think of. A team of potholers found that the deeper they went into this network of caves, the more moss they found on the walls. And they eventually found an ecosystem. This was a BBC documentary. I think they eventually found an ecosystem of these crab and insect-like creatures with clear shells, with no pigmentation in the shells because they didn't need it because there was no sunlight down there. But what they did have were the two fundamentals for life, which were water and heat. So they had that. I don't know what those little creatures would taste like, to be honest, but mind you, it's of course I'm not sure if you could rule out the sun's effect there still either completely. But everything we see around us is basically converted light, matter, everything.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't know about this. Interesting. But as we wrap up, Alex, what are you doing next? And what's next for you?
Okay, well, we would very much like to go to Cambodia, or I should say the team that I'm working with, the geologists Susan Moore and Patricia Arian that I've mentioned. We would like to go to Cambodia, so we do have a GoFundMe campaign at the moment because I've spent all of my money over the past 3 years doing everything else, and I just can't afford to go this time. Angkor Wat, as mentioned earlier, is on the other end of the ancient equator, so it's on the opposite side of the planet to Easter Island. This is basically vital for our research because that's what we're looking into now. We're not just looking at Egypt or Peru or Bolivia separately. We're looking at how these sites are connected, and Angkor Wat is the last one on the line. So I would really like to go to Angkor Wat in Cambodia. GoFundMe, please. GoFundMe.
Interesting.
Let's see. I mean, we can go into depth on possible migration patterns about what could have happened afterwards, because Scotland is related to Egypt through Scotia, Nova Scotia. Scotia, or Scotia, was an Egyptian princess. There are also the Round Towers in Ireland. Again, this is Philip Callahan's research. They may have been using the same agricultural process that the pyramids may have used as well. In other words, drawing down some form of cosmic energy and distributing it through the land to increase crop yields. So if I don't get to go abroad again, there may be stuff in the UK, maybe in Ireland, to go and do instead. So we'll see.
Wait. So that Scotia thing, I mean, okay, it could be just a coincidence, or it could be just a cultural impact, and the local people who founded the area happened to be reading about Egyptians that day. Oh, Princess Scotia. Oh, Nova Scotia then.
Yeah.
But that's interesting yet profound. But I want to say coincidence, but no, that sounds too simple. What that reminds me of actually is the Mormons, where they say there's that 13th tribe. Because when you said Scotia, I thought you're not going to say like a colony of Egypt then. I was going to say that sounds interesting. I've never heard that before.
Well, Scotland is the seat of Freemasonry.
Yeah, I've heard this before, yeah.
Freemasonry don't extend any further back than Sumeria, and of course Freemasonry is stonemasonry, and that's exactly what we're looking at. Or that's the path of clues. It's what's left behind in the stone is what we're looking at. So maybe it would be worth a trip up to Scotland at some point to talk to a few people.
Yeah, because as soon as you start talking about Scotland and the Rosicrucians and Adam Weishaupt and all sorts of other can of worms, and then oddly enough, everything will start to be full circle then. It goes all over the place then. Yeah. But anyway, Alex, as we wrap up, what's the best way for the audience to get in touch with you?
Okay, well, I have my own website, which is www.mott-resource, that's MOTT-resource.com. There's the Trash Arts website. There's the Trash Arts YouTube channel. We're all on Facebook and Twitter. So if anybody else has a project coming up, I mean, that's the kind of thing that we like to get our teeth into. a project where they've heard some astounding claims about some region of the world or what you can find in some region of the world, and they need someone to actually go out there and verify whether these claims are true, because that's basically what we've been doing in the Rethinking documentaries, comparing the claims that are made about these sites to what you actually find when you go there. And sometimes the claims and the physical evidence are somewhat different.
Yeah, I've come to realise that the textbook is completely different from the actual physical location.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'll include those links in the show notes below. But Alex, thanks a lot for coming on the show. Thank you very much. And so please remember, ladies and gentlemen at home, if you haven't already, click on the subscribe button below and press the bell notification right next to it for the latest uploads. But if you're watching this elsewhere, follow and give it an upvote, because either way, there's plenty more content to come. Because you see, this channel is all about helping you become a remarkable entrepreneur. Because you see, life is all about opportunity. We can do amazing things with our life. The way the world is set up today, technology, infrastructure, and all the rest, there's so much opportunity out there. So go out there today and do something remarkable with your life. How cool is that?
Absolutely. Don't sit there and think about it. Do it.
Precisely.